Good morning. I'm Sydney Stowe, the Director of Film at the Hopkins Center, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, author, producer, and screenwriter, Julian Fellowes. He is the mind, the pen, and the heart of the cultural phenomenon that is Downton Abbey. From 2010 to 2016, over 120 million people have tuned in over 25 countries to live and love with the Crawley family and their staff. And it's been quite a ride. From entails to eclampsia to Mr. Pamuk and to what is a weekend? We cannot imagine our life without having the Crawleys and Downton Abbey in it. Julian, welcome to Dartmouth.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So we have a few prepared questions from the audience and ourselves, and then we're going to open it up also to the viewers right now. So please send in your comments. First off, to me, Downton's greatest strength and joy is in its characters, from the grand house to beloved Isis. Sherry Fiore and Brian Megan have also asked about the characters as well. And so we wanted to explore some of this. Some of them, like Cousin Violet and this chap that we see here, are veritable institutions almost unto themselves, while others, like Thomas, start as villains, but ultimately win our hearts. So my question is, did you have all of these characters' stories and arcs in mind when you started, or were their journeys shaped season to season by audience response and reaction?
I don't know about being shaped by audience response. When you start, you don't think you're going to have a world hit on your hands that will run 6 years and then go to movies. So anyone who thinks like that needs to be taken away by the men in white coats. All you're trying to do is produce some watchable television for the next season and then see how it happens. I think that when you have an ongoing narrative as opposed to a single storyline that you will pursue, Belgravia, for instance, which is my latest, is a single narrative. You play out the story, and at the end, you get to the end.
Right.
Whereas Downton was always conceived as something that would go on, a kind of soap-like entity that would continue. And so when you're creating characters for that, you're trying to create people who have the potential to go in any one of various different ways. That you would be interested in what happened to them romantically. Could they be caught out in other ways? Are they happy in their work? Are they unhappy? And you're trying to give hints all the time that these are people you will be interested in following. Someone like Thomas is a slightly different situation, because one thing I do rather like to do is to take a character where the audience thinks they know what they think,
right,
and then gradually maneuver it so that they find themselves sympathizing with someone who in real life they probably wouldn't have anything to do with.
Right.
And other people do this too. I'm not suggesting it's unique, but I felt it was interesting to take a gay character, and of course, to be gay in from 1912 onwards was extremely tough.
Right.
Very, very difficult. It was still a crime. You could still be imprisoned. You're one slip up when you've had one too many drinks and your career is over. I mean, all the time you're walking a tightrope. And I thought we would get someone who was defensive and rather hostile because of the way in which he's having to live, and then gradually get to know him until the audience finds, to its surprise in some cases,
I know,
that they're
rooting for him.
Yeah. What I feel, I mean, I don't believe I'm curing cancer. I know what I'm doing is writing TV for people to have an enjoyable Sunday night, I hope. But sometimes you can make them just think a little bit about a prejudice they've had before or an assumption, and just make them question it a bit. That's all I aspire to. I don't see myself as holding aloft a religious icon on a high mountain, but I think you can do that.
Well, I wanted to ask about the English social structure, because I feel like that is a through line and a backdrop against which so many of your stories unfold. You've got Downton, you've got 1840s Belgravia, and now the birth of football. So to illustrate this, we wanted to run a short trailer of your new show, The English Game, which is now streaming on Netflix. So let's take a look.
It started with a game.
The game.
A gentleman's sport.
Football. The people's game.
Some northern mill workers versus
a bunch of southern toffs.
2 teams. 2 worlds apart.
Led out by 2 captains.
One who played our game by our rules.
A generous man.
A father-to-be.
who needs to grow up.
A flaming snob and a cheat.
The other, a Scotsman.
An outsider.
A working-class hero.
A money grabber.
A man who led a revolution.
A man that touched so many hearts.
2 very different men.
Who both wanted the same thing.
To win.
To change the game.
Forever.
So many authors have obviously explored the upstairs-downstairs dynamic. What I love about Downton is that it was singular to me because it actually gave all of the servants an interior life as rich and as resonant as their employers. But my question is, why do you find the class system in England so interesting? And sort of what are you imagining that the global audience feels that as well? Because we've all taken this film to heart and your successive works, but it feels like that's where you keep coming back to as an examination of the class system. And I'm sort of curious about your thoughts on that.
Yes. I mean, I have a sort of fascination with the class system. There's no doubt about that. It's completely true. And I think it comes from the fact that my parents, who were very happily married, and I was very fond of them both, so I don't have any terrible childhood stories.
Right.
But they were unevenly matched. My father came from one of those families, you know, that's in the stud books and all that kind of thing. Right. And not a particularly elevated one, but I mean, he was there. And my mother was the daughter of a middle-class civil servant. And although, you know, she wasn't selling violets in Covent Garden, but I mean, it was seen in the 1930s as an unequal marriage. And his family were quite hostile to her. She was very beautiful, and they held that against her. They thought, in a sense, that was the snare that had caught their nephew.
That was the lure.
That was the lure. And so it was nothing to praise. And they never really relented. I mean, in the end, she gave birth to 4 sons. And of course, we were all vials of the sacred blood. And so there was an element of forgiveness, but never completely. And I would see how unhappy it could make her, these prejudices, and how she would be wrong-footed and how she would work and work and work to do something right for them, but they wouldn't accept it as right. They would always pick holes. They would always, you know, and we would be brought for tea, and there was never, can you stay for a cup of tea? It was always come back at 6, you know. Wow. And when you've seen that close up, as a child, of course, it's very bewildering. You kind of slightly think, what's going on? But gradually, you get the hang of what's going on. And from there grew my awareness of how this seemingly unimportant element of birth, which even by the time of my childhood was much less important than it had been 50 or 100 years before.
Right.
Nevertheless, it still shaped people's lives. It shaped their ambitions. People who were geniuses would make fortunes, and the one thing they wanted was to be seen as an equal by people who were less intelligent than them, less special than them, who had contributed less than them. Even so, they would take up shooting, they would take up riding, they would take up hunting, they would buy houses in the country, anything. So they would be accepted by these people.
Like Carlyle. Your character, Carlyle, was that way.
Carlyle was that way.
The newspaper magnate.
And that was part of why he wanted to marry Mary. Not entirely, actually, because these things are never simple. But
Right.
one of her attractions was that she would take him into the inner camp.
Right. Yeah.
Even though he was cleverer than anyone else at Downton.
Right.
But
Well,
he
and
didn't
that
feel it.
you had said that one of your inspirations was the Edith Wharton's Buccaneers, about the American heiresses trading dollars for nobility. And
Yes.
that's where I think I read that Cora was one of your first characters. And
That's
being
right.
American, she had the ability to mess up and to look at the system from the outside because she was American and married into it.
She
But
was
yet her
actually
money
the
made it
first.
possible.
She was the first character I thought of. I mean, I was just interested that we know all about those young American debutantes tripping
Right.
down the gangplank into the arms of a marquis. But what was it like 20 or 30 years later?
Right.
You know, when they were sitting in these freezing houses in Sunderland or whatever. I mean,
doing it all wrong.
deeply envious of their sisters on Long Island, spending the summer in Newport.
Yeah.
But that was a case of where these girls, often better educated than their English sisters-in-law, would be brought to these houses and patronized while they donated gazillions of dollars to
Right.
keep the show on the road for probably half a century longer than it would have been on the road otherwise.
Right.
And there were a lot of them. There were about 400 or 500 of them who married into different tiers of the aristocracy and kept the life going right into the 20s and 30s with their money. And in many cases, I mean, you take the most famous in a way was Consuelo Vanderbilt, who married the Duke of Marlborough. And I mean, she was an extraordinary woman, very clever, very intuitive, very beautiful also, which is a plus, and a tremendous organizer, tremendous benefactor. He was as dull as a stick, very unpleasant, and nobody liked him. And he and his sisters tried to patronize her and put her in her place.
Wow.
And I mean, what was that like? You know,
especially because was her money what kept his baronial lands? I mean, in so many of these
Blenheim
cases,
back Blenheim would have gone by now if it wasn't for
Right.
Consuelo.
right. Yeah.
And there was he building enormous gardens and parterres and this and that and the other when everyone else was putting their house on the market.
Right. Yeah.
And yet, did it gain her any respect? Not from other people, yes, but not from the family.
Right. Wow.
Wow.
Oh, that's disheartening. You would think the money would at least help a little bit, but well, one of the things that we wanted to talk about in addition to the social structure and the character is how so much of your work also deals with the issue of secrets and the role they play in the story and the role you put them in the story. Gosford Park, for example, is a juicy whodunit, which abounds in secrecy. And in Downton, the series starts off with everyone above board, seemingly guileless and innocent. And then as our characters acquire their secrets, their paths and those around them are forever marked. Belgravia, your new show, follows a little bit of a different format. One secret sets the whole plot in motion and connects these two families. So let's take a quick look at Belgravia.
Lady Brockenhurst, I am in possession of a secret.
Yes?
Are you all right?
You remind me of someone I used to know.
Who is this man, Pope? And why is father investing in his business?
Charles Pope.
Mr. Pope.
Charles Pope. Everyone is obsessed with that man.
Let's run away together. We chose a life of lies. Now those lies have returned to haunt us.
So as a writer, how do you, and I do realize you write for different forms, as you said, Gosford's 2 hours, Belgravia's 6, and Downton was a long episodic drama. How do you get a sense of which secrets how to weave them into the character story and the plot line to be able to have a thrilling and entertaining consequence and have it? I'm sort of curious what your process is, and does it matter the form that you're writing for versus the stories that you've got in your head about where to put the secrets?
All of us, to a degree, have secrets, and we are all presenting ourselves to our friends and to our family, to people who don't know us and to people who know us very well, in a way that we like and we approve of. We keep all the bits that we don't want anyone to be aware of under our skirts.
Yes.
And
well
that's
hidden.
how we do it. And when a married couple, split up and they try to tell you what's gone wrong, even when they think they're telling you the truth, they're not. They're only telling you a partial truth.
Right.
And you have to hear it as a partial truth and kind of not contradict them, but not go along with it entirely. The Victorians, in a sense, took this almost to an art form because they liked to present their society as a perfect society that was working incredibly well. And if they had a son who didn't play the game, he would be packed off to South Africa or something, or Australia,
India,
with, an income depending on his never returning.
Right.
He would be a remittance man. The girls would be married off to foreigners and lost in the depths of Naples or whatever if they'd been having too much fun back in Britain. They were very disciplined about keeping this thing. But you still see it. You see it very strongly in America, that if you ask an American, particularly on the West Coast, how's it going? Great. How did the house turn out? Best choice I ever made. Right. And the new job, fantastic.
Love it. Right.
The kids, they've never been better. And later you learn the house was a disaster. Half the money's gone. The kids are shooting up. But that's not presented. You're given a winner to like and to get to know. And in fact, it is a mark of a great compliment when you're having dinner with an American friend and they tell you a trouble they're going through, whether it's at work or in their private life or whatever, you should take that as the highest compliment, because normally they won't tell a soul except for their therapist. But they won't, because they want to be seen as a winner. The Victorians were the same. It's the same prejudice. But it's rather unfair now. We sort of make fun of them for it when we're doing exactly the same in a different way.
Exactly.
But I mean, for me, secrets, getting to know someone's secrets are really at the core of getting to know that person. When you can start to unravel their secrets.
Like Thomas,
we get to know his secrets.
Right.
But again, even they're not all of them. You
right.
know. We don't really know what Thomas has got up to in the past.
Right.
And we're not going to find out either.
Right. Well, we're looking forward to Belgravia, which I think is streaming now on ePix. And because that secret sounds, well, as you saw in the trailer, it sounds like it's a good one in terms of how we want to live and how we view ourselves.
I like Belgravia. I think it's turned out well. It was fun to write a single compact narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right.
And that was rather a treat, actually, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I bet.
And we got a terrific cast. So, I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you. So I'm going to bring in now my colleague, Johanna Evans, and she has been monitoring the chat and the comments, of which I can only imagine there are thousands. So I'm going to turn this over to her. Don't worry. And we'll sort of see where we go from there.
Lovely.
We're so happy to be joining you. I wrote a paper about Downton Abbey in grad school, and so this is sort of a dream to do some follow-up research and find out more about where these stories came from. We have lots of love in the chat from Abigail and from Maura wanting to know whether the characters are going to return in a future Downton Abbey film, but particularly Maggie Smith. And this actually rolls nicely into a question that we got in through email about how you craft your older female characters. It's so rare to see such rich, fully developed older female characters on screen. And they just want to know, how do you go about writing these characters to be so strong and so memorable when women have generally gotten the short shrift in historical fiction?
Well, I think my childhood was very much dominated by older women, by great aunts and grandmothers and cousins who were like great aunts and so on. And I think they were an overhang of the war, looking back on it, because in the war years, the men had gone in most households. They were off at the front or whatever. And to keep the show on the road, the women had to pick up all the reins and make the decisions and keep it running. And these, you know, by the 1950s and early 60s were much older by then, but they were still those women who had kept the thing going during the tough times. And they were very vivid characters. I mean, Maggie is certainly based on a slight sort of amalgam of two of my great aunts. And I like those strong women. I don't really understand why they are so seldom written, because when they are, everyone enjoys them.
Yes, profoundly.
And, you know, whether it's Harold and Maude or whatever it is, right. We love these old women who've seen life and come in with their opinions. And of course they know a lot because they've been through a lot. And rather than just having the juvenile leads expressing their largely uninteresting view of the world, which has naturally been very limited, I like to hear some experience from the older characters, the older men too, actually. I mean, I always have older characters in everything I write.
Right.
Well, this actually leads into another question we got from a viewer, Anna Gato, who wanted to know about the timing. You mentioned that some of the narrative covers World War I. How did you decide how long Downton Abbey was going to go on for, and finding that endpoint in the mid-20s? The timeline actually seems to go by faster than the actors were able to age over the course of the story.
It's not too bad. I mean, we cast the girls slightly older than their characters.
Right.
And now I think Mary is only 3 years older than Michelle, which seems to me quite near.
Right.
How we set about it originally, we really thought originally in terms of 3 series, if, you know, we should be so lucky.
Right.
And by putting it, the first one, 1912 to 1914,
right,
it meant that if there was a second series, then we would begin it in the war. I didn't want to do 4 years of the war, so we started in 1916, and we did to the beginning of 1919, so that was 2 years again.
Right.
And then we came back in, I think, 1920 or 21, and we did 2 years. We usually did 2 years in each series.
Right.
And that was the pattern. And as I say, most of the characters are within 5 years of the actors' ages, because the whole thing took 10 years. So right, they're all 10 years older than when we cast them.
Right, right.
And the whole thing from 1912 to 1928, I think. No, not 28. What was 27, I think, was the movie. I mean, that is only 15 years, isn't it?
Right,
and
right.
Since we passed 10 years anyway, we're pretty close, I think. But really, we were choosing situations. I mean, the advantage of 3 series was that it meant we had one part of the pre-war world, which wasn't technically Edwardian because King Edward was dead. But I mean, nevertheless, it was a continuation of that life. Then we had 2 years in the war, basically changing the rules. And then we had 2 years in the 20s, which was a very different place to be. So we knew that the first 3 series, whatever else happened, were going to be very contrasted, but legitimately, because the world was very different between 1912 and 1922.
Yeah.
And that was why we positioned it there.
Well, and it's interesting hearing you talk about what changed between seasons and how you created that contrast. One of our viewers, Matt Gannon, wrote in about one of these changes that happened at the end of a season. Of course, the surprising death of handsome cousin Matthew. And Matt Gannon wants to know,
died.
Where did this come from? And how did you feel about killing off this character that everybody so loved?
And did you have to enter witness protection program after you did?
I needed it.
I was going to say.
No, I mean, it was quite difficult because Jessica Brown Finlay, who played Sybil, you see, in England, you can only get a 3-year contract at the beginning of a series with the actors.
Oh, I didn't know that.
In America, you can get 5 years or even at times 7, but we don't do anything longer than 3. So it's up to the actors at the end of 3 years to whether or not they will stay. And Jessica Brown Finlay had said from the very beginning, I'm only doing 3 years and that's it. And so I did research and we found eclampsia, and eclampsia was invariably fatal in the 1920s if fitting had started. So that was that. It was also quite interesting because pre-eclampsia is still a very dangerous condition, actually. Right. So all of that seemed quite helpful and so on and so on. So that was fine. But Matthew, Dan, hadn't decided to leave. So I wrote the first 5 series and they'd been cast and the directors had been chosen. And I thought, well, we'll kill Sybil in 5 and then we've got 3 to get over it, you know, and all of that. And then suddenly Matthew was offered a Broadway show and a movie. And you know, in acting, you've got to follow your gut. I mean, there's no other ruling. There's no ladder that's mapped out. It's not like the civil service where you always get promoted if you get to this. That's not how acting is. And he felt this was his chance. He had to take it. And so he came up at just before the read-through and said, I'm going to leave at the end of the year. Well, of course, by then I'd already written 5 episodes and Sybil was already dead. Otherwise, I would have killed them together in a bus or something.
Fiery plane crash.
Yes, or a car. But anyway, and then I thought, well, because we've got Sybil dying in 5 and we've got the funeral in 6 and we've got the argument between Robert and Cora and blah, 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 blah. We can't have all that again or the whole series will turn into 6 Feet Under.
Right.
And so the way to get round that is to kill him in the last shot of the show and then have a 6-month break before the beginning of the next series. So you rejoin them when Mary is beginning to wake up after the shock. And then you go on from there. Well, that was fine, except that in England, the last episode was shown as a special on Christmas night.
That's right.
So everyone was sitting down to put one too many mince pies into their mouth. And suddenly, boom!
Merry Christmas.
He's dead. How's that? And so we did get very, very hysterical response and letters and everything. But, you know, I mean, I don't in any sense blame Matthew for putting us in that spot because he did go on. He did his play on Broadway. He did the first of several movies, you know, and with films like Beauty and the Beast and everything, he's really got together a movie career. So good luck to him.
Well, and his departure also allowed Mary's character to shift completely.
Yeah, sure.
You know, if they'd stayed married, she wouldn't have been the estate steward. And
no. And also we would have had to find some other reason why they were unhappy. They couldn't have children, because the one thing that's difficult to dramatize is happiness. I mean, why Hollywood always put it to the end of the 9th reel was because one kiss and a hug, and that's about enough of other people's happiness. So then roll the credits and let's get on.
We want their misery.
Yeah, we want their misery. That's what we want.
Right.
So we couldn't have gone on watching Mary and Matthew being happy.
All swoony. Yeah, it would have gotten old.
It's funny, though, hearing you talk about your characters, you still have so much affection in your voice when you're talking about them being miserable. And we have a question in here from Karen Donovan, who wants to know, do you have any favorite characters when you're writing? Any particular, you know, favorite children that you want to spoil in your stories, or do you love them all equally?
I think in a way you love them all because you've made them all up and you've quite deliberately given all of them enough subtext, enough character development, enough dramas to get the audience involved, and in involving the audience, rather like Deborah Carr singing her happy tune, you involve yourself and you get drawn into these characters' predicaments. You want to see them happy. You want to see things work out for them. And I think that's just part of it. Who was that suddenly came on the screen?
That was
Edith.
That was
my God, I didn't recognize her.
That was the perennial underdog that you know, by the end, you really root for her. Boy, not in the beginning.
You know, the thing about Edith, in my experience, some people are just unlucky. They always miss the bus. They always lose the plane.
They get left at the altar.
That's a big one. But, you know, they get to the last two and then they don't get it, you know. And so I wanted to have that sisterly rivalry because Mary is the opposite. She's one of those people.
She gets everything.
Comes right for.
Right.
And why I wanted to have a sort of almost a kind of family joke that in the end, Edith ends up with a higher rank than Mary.
Yeah. And I just want to thank you for that. That is just a really wonderful present to your audience at the end of that whole season. When Bertie gets it, you're just sitting there doing the math thinking, oh my God, this is how her story ends. So,
although he nearly lost her. Of course, I mean, what I like to write is when you have a situation where you agree with one side, but then as you watch the drama unfold, you start to kind of see the other point of view.
Right.
And with that, when Bertie found out about the child and broke it off, and we're all on either side, poor Edith, I can't bear it. And then he says to her later, it's not about the child, it's about the fact you didn't tell me.
Right.
And of course, in that moment, you do kind of see his point of view that this is not an unreasonable thing to feel that the relationship is not what you thought it was. If she was prepared to keep this secret while you took her down the aisle.
Right.
And that is, I would call that a Downton disagreement, that you're sort of on both sides. That's what I like. But I like them all.
We have another question sort of related to writing from Veronica Avalos, who wants to know, do you have any advice for aspiring writers or people who want to go into the industry?
I mean, it's very tough. And in the end, in my experience, you need a bit of luck. And anyone who tells you that luck played no part is not telling the truth. But you can put yourself in the way of luck. And you can kind of keep yourself in the game. I mean, my one main bit of advice to people who want to be writers is write. Don't wait until you're in the mood. Don't wait until you're commissioned. Keep writing. Because if you write something really good, of course, every one of us who's written a good film script, uncommissioned and off our own bat, thinks that someone is going to read it and say, this has to be a movie, and it's going to run off and make it. But that's probably not going to happen. But what might happen is that they read it, and even though they don't want to make it, they think, this is pretty good. And so when they're looking for someone to write the film they want to make next, you're one of the three names on the piece of paper.
Right.
And if only the first two will turn down the job, then you get the offer. I mean, I know that something like 8 people turned down the job of Gosford Park. Now, I don't know why they turned it down. Thank God they did. I always think it was my mother whispering to them in their sleep. But you know, in the end, I had written a script that didn't get made, never got made, but the producer liked it. And finally, he said to Bob Altman, look, there is this guy, you won't have heard of him, but this is his kind of territory. And I think you should bear him in mind as a possible writer. And I was on a conference call, and then I had to write down some character outlines and everything. Surprisingly, quite a few of them went into the movie. And then I was commissioned to write a first draft. And that was the beginning of the whole thing. And you just don't know where it's going to come from. So I would say, write, don't wait till you're in the mood. Don't wait until there is some seismic reason to write, make sure that every day, every evening, whatever it is, even if it's only for an hour, you write. And don't always keep rewriting the same 37 pages. Keep moving forward with the script or the novel or the musical book or whatever it is that you're writing. Keep moving forward. And one last thing is try and finish the day's work knowing what comes next, because that does make it very much easier the next morning or the next day whenever you write. If you know the first scene or the first chapter that you're going to write, that will get you going. And then hopefully you can keep going. If you write absolutely to the end of your vision, it can be quite difficult to restart. But anyway, that would be my advice. And keep going, because the other thing you have to remember, I was 50 when I wrote Gosford Park.
Yeah.
I had written some children's shows for the BBC. I'd written Little Lord Fauntleroy and a couple of others. But I wrote those in my late 40s. That was the complete beginning of writing for television.
Right.
I hadn't written anything before that, apart from a couple of really bad novels. So you never know.
Well, and we did have some love come into the chat from Ben Johnson and Becky Bailey, who both said that they love Gosford Park, and they were curious how you went about this project. A film with an ensemble of characters is maybe a little bit different to put together than a television show with an ensemble of characters, where you have more time to unpack their stories. There are some similarities between Gosford Park and Downton Abbey. What was it like working on the film dynamic with that ensemble versus a television show?
Yes, Downton is different from Gosford, actually, because Downton is a much sunnier place.
Yeah.
Gosford is a dark story, really. I mean, there are funny bits and everything, but Gosford could not have sustained an ongoing series.
Right.
It just wouldn't have had the right emotional mood. But I'll tell you exactly how I constructed Gosford. I was asked if I'd done these character sketches I was talking about, and I'd sent them off, and I'd had more of these terrifying telephone calls and so on. And then Robert Altman and Bob Balaban said to me, would I like to write a first draft of a film? I've never written a feature that got made. They've never heard of me. Well, Balaban has, but Altman never had heard of me.
Right.
And so what I did is I went to, in those days it was video, I went to the video shop and I took out every single Altman movie I could find. And I gave myself a personal Altman festival for about 5 days. I watched nothing but Altman movies. And I made notes about the shape that they all had, the distinguishing characteristics, things they shared, so on and so forth. Because what I wanted was Robert Altman, who's of course very American. I mean, his films are one of the sort of main items of Americana.
Yes.
And here he was commissioning a film. It was very loose, brief. It was simply about a house party in which a murder happens, but this isn't a whodunit, it's a who cares whodunit. That was brief. So I've got this brief, and I knew that he would probably come to the first draft when I'd finally sent it in, thinking, here goes nothing. This is not going to be for me. I don't know anything about these people. And my plan was that he would open the cover and recognize the movie and find in it a film that he would know how to make immediately. And that was the scheme. And so because they were all multi-arc, multi-narrative pictures with some arcs that were 3 scenes, others that went right through the movie and so on, the whole thing was constructed along those lines so that he would see that even though people were called Lady Mary this and Sir Humphrey that, and others were footmen and ladies' maids, nevertheless, it was an Altman picture.
Right.
And that was the plot, really.
Well, that's brilliant. And I mean, so much of your work reminds me of great works of English literature. I mean, Belgravia reminds me a lot of George Eliot's Daniel Deronda. So Sydney and I were wondering, you must be a great reader, and what are you reading to get through the pandemic? What's on your bookshelf, and what's in your Netflix queue?
At the moment, I'm reading a biography of the 5th Duke of Rutland and his brother, Lord Robert Manners, who was a very successful sailor and a tragic hero in the end. I then go on to a book written by a friend of mine called Catherine Katz, and the book is called The Daughters of Yalta, and it's about Averell Harriman, Churchill, and Roosevelt, who all took their daughters to Yalta. And these 3 young women accompanied their father to the Yalta Conference in 1945, which is rather interesting to me. Well, nobody knows it, and that's why it's rather an extraordinary subject. And you get the impressions of this world generation-changing conference from the eyes of these 3 young women quite early in their lives. And that's what I've got lined up next. But before both of those, I was reading Framley Parsonage by Anthony Trollope.
Oh, wow.
I've read before, but not for ages. So that's about it for my immediate reading.
Any plans to adapt Trollope? Is that in the works?
Well, I love Trollope. I'm a big fan of Trollope. And I did, in fact, I'm president of the Trollope Society, and all this stuff. And I did adapt Dr. Thorne with Tom Hollander playing Thorne wonderfully, actually. Marvelous performance. And I enjoyed that very much. So if I come upon an opportunity to adapt Trollope again, in fact, it was an adaptation of Trollope, the Eustace Diamonds, that got me Gosford.
Really?
The script I'd written for Balaban that never got made.
Right.
So Trollope is quite woven into the woof of my career.
Well, I had known about Dr. Thorne. I didn't know that there were other projects sitting on the shelf, maybe waiting to be dusted off for the future.
Well, I've had 2 or 3 films made that at the beginning I couldn't give away, but
and now,
change.
Are you involved with Wind in the Willows, or is that another internet rumor, like the Downton movie sequel? Which
no, I wrote a book for a new version of Wind in the Willows, which played at the London Palladium.
Okay.
And now there is an idea to get it going again, possibly in another form. So we'll have to see. But, to some extent, you have to sort of cast your bread on the water and hope it comes back buttered toast. You can't wake up every morning worrying about everything. Right. You just sort of hope things are doing quite well. And one day someone will ring you up and say, we've got a start date. And that's it.
Well, until that happens, I cannot thank you enough. This has been such a treat to have you here, and we're so grateful. We are. I think I told you earlier before the chat. We've spent years with the watch parties, and I've seen actually the whole canon twice for a variety of reasons. I will not bore you with, but
that's the only thing I want to know. Why did you watch it twice?
Well, the first time was Johanna was part of it. We had a woman's watch party. We met every week and watched Downton together. And then all ages, I think, didn't your grandmother come to one of them, Joe?
She was there for that special Christmas episode when Matthew was offed. And she'd come up for a very special occasion. My grandmother's in the chat, by the way. Hello, Grandmama.
She had a few choice words for you. Yes.
And the second time?
Well, ironically, my partner had never seen the series. And what I think is so remarkable, I know, well, he's from another planet. And so I threw it on thinking, okay, let's see is this going to be something he'd be interested in? And, once we hit Pamuk, it was all over. I mean, that was it. In fact, I was hoping we could end with you telling everyone, I forgot in the secret section because I was so excited to talk about it, the piece about Pamuk, which as I said to you, is in the lexicon. It is something that we refer to regularly in all types of embarrassing situations. But you were saying that piece of inspiration is actually cinema verite.
Yes, it's rather interesting because people used to say, I mean, ridiculous storylines, if that could ever happen. In fact, it is the 100% truthful story. And it came into my life years ago. We were staying with a friend at one of England's sort of great houses. And he'd just come upon the diaries of a great aunt in the 1890s, a little bit earlier than Downton. And in this house, lots of houses had what they called the bachelor corridor, where they had unmarried men would sleep if they were there for a shooting party or whatever, something like that. But this one had a maiden corridor for not unmarried women, but single women.
Right.
And they were all there. And of course, these single women were sort of widows or debutantes or, whatever, spinsters. And one of them had sort of inveigled one of the male guests into her room that night, and he died on the job. It's completely true. And of course, this woman, 1894, with a dead body on the bed.
Oh.
And she thought, what am I going to do? And finally, she woke up the woman next door. This blameless matron came to the door, and she realized that if this story got out, it would be all over London by Tuesday. And so they woke up the other women and girls along this passage, and between them, they lifted this dead body and they crossed this entire enormous house, and they got it down into his bedroom in the bachelor corridor, where it was found the next morning by his valet. And they never told. That's the extraordinary thing. Their generation, unlike ours, keep their own secret. And they never told, and it never got out. And he looked up his great-great-grandfather's diary of the same weekend, and it said, poor Mr. Snoops, whatever his name was,
right,
found dead by his valet on Saturday morning. Such a shame. And he never knew. And as I was listening to it, I thought, one day, this story is going to be really useful. And that day came.
Oh, just so good. And also tied in with Johanna's comment about your powerful women heroines, when I think it's Anna says to Mary, who needs to know this? Who is going to be the most hurt by this news? And they went and got Cora. I mean, it's just the allies that were created that night when that happened.
And then we have Robert downstairs saying, try and keep this away from the women. They're so upset. For them to deal with it. And we've seen them struggling with the body down the passage. I know.
A half mile, right? Apparently, Highclere Castle is a half mile, as Violet says.
You have to go upstairs and then down another passage and all the rest of it.
Oh my
God. It wasn't a joke.
Well, you never know what you can do until your reputation's on the line.
Well, that's like lifting a bus off your child, isn't it?
Right. So on that note, I think we're going to let you go, because otherwise we'd have you here all afternoon and we'd be moving right into dinner and cocktails. At least you would, because you're 5 hours ahead. But again, I cannot thank you enough, Julian. I am so grateful to our personal family friend for connecting us, and that you took the time to, digitally dive into our little New Hampshire enclave and talk to us about your projects.
Well, I'm so impressed that your digital link actually worked. Normally, everyone says, oh, it'll work, it's easy. And then 45 minutes later, you're still being told to press the little button on the left above the red dot. And there was none of that. I pressed it, it worked.
I don't know who was more shocked, you or me. And then you popped right in, and I thought, oh, well, there's at least another night of nightmares I can avoid, because we got you here. And you're such a sport, because, I'm sure you spend your day talking about Downton and Belgravia and English Game. But we are so delighted. I know I sound like having a ridiculous fangirl moment, so I'm going to spare everyone and let you go.
Very nice to see you both. You all. See everyone.
Yes.
And good luck for the future.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye. So next week, we're going to continue to capitalize on our small screen fun format by talking about more of our favorite television programs. This time with actress, director, podcaster, and mixologist, Aisha Tyler. We hope to see you in a living room near you next Thursday night, May 14th. Until then, keep calm and carry on. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thanks, Julian.